always have troublers who can't make it and want to see the meeting. So we are going to be recording. And we are so happy. I'm so happy to see everybody. And I'm particularly just want to give a shout out to the folks who are here for the first time. And again, if this is your first Troubler meeting, if you would put your name and email in the chat, that would be wonderful. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me just a minute here. Okay, so here's what I would like to do before we move on to reviewing the agenda and before we even begin the rest of the agenda is I want to take a moment to acknowledge, to pause, to acknowledge, to honor, to mourn, to recognize what an extraordinarily sorrowful week this has been. And I wanted to read something from Stacey Abrams. While our eyes are focused on the Chauvin trial, new deaths race to fill up our vision and break our hearts. Unarmed children are not men. Their deaths are never justifiable.
Right.
And a traffic stop should not be fatal.
Right.
God grant us mercy until the law gives us justice.
Mm.
There is both so much to say and absent of words also. So I think what we just do is remember these names, which are just a small number of the total, and trust that their memory will recommit ourselves, will remind us to recommit ourselves steadily and always to this continued work, the point of which is to change the future. And so we move forward with a fierce and a persistent hope. And this is why we do this work. Okay. Here is our agenda. We are going to start by talking about Senate Bill 202, and we are really fortunate to have three speakers who are going to be talking to us about this. April Albright will be speaking from Black Voters Matter. Our own Zan Thornton will be talking from Georgia Adapt. Syra Draper will be talking from the Democratic Party of Georgia Voter Protection Team. And then we'll be talking about the criminal justice reform work that the Necessary Trouble has underway. Some of that is an update, and some of that is an extraordinarily powerful personal story from one of our own troublers, Laura Nieto. And then we will have a section, and we won't be doing updates on all the troubler work underway, but just that work for which we are recruiting. And at this point, I am going to turn this over to Judy, to our wonderful co-coordinator, Judy Jones. And let me make sure that Judy can unmute herself.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you, Becky, and good afternoon, Troublers. Great to have you all here. What a wonderful turnout. As you all know, Governor Kemp signed into law on March 29th or somewhere thereabout, the restrictive law that is now SB 202 that the nation has been looking at us. The nation looked at us on January 6th or thereabouts after the Senate election, and gave us all our flowers that are due to us for voting in two Democratic Democratic US senators. And now the nation looks at us as one of the several states in this country that are enacting laws to further suppress the vote. SB 202 is one of those in Georgia. And one of the things that it does is give state level officials the authority to usurp the powers of county election boards. It requires a significant ID for absentee ballots, and it limits the places of drop boxes. So we are happy to have April Albright representing Black Voters Matter to address the disproportionate impact that this bill, SB 202, has on Black voters, as well as the Black Voters Matter lawsuit. A little bit about Black Voters Matters, in case you don't know, is they played an integral and incredibly powerful role and influence in the 2020 Georgia elections and runoffs, in which 1 million plus Black voters turned out. Their goal is to increase power in marginalized, predominantly Black communities. So with that said, I'm going to give this space now to April Albright. Welcome, April.
Hello, I hope everybody's doing good today. As she said, I'm the legal director for Black Voters Matter Fund, and we have been working alongside many voting rights and civil rights organizations in the state of Georgia to try to bring change to stop this bill from being passed. We started our work, way early in January, and that work was a graduated campaign from trying to go to the committee meetings to keep it from getting out of committee. And once we realized they were going to fast track the bill, and were determined to get it past this session, we began to enact, along with our partners, a corporate pressure campaign, hoping that we could get corporations who, where many Black voters work, where many Black voters purchase, items. We were hopeful to pull them into this discussion because they should be, right? And so we did that, and we believe that those efforts, while they slowed the bill's progress down, while they certainly got some of the worst provisions taken, some other worst provisions taken out, it still was passed. And so we, along with other organizations like New Georgia Project, Students Rising, joined Mark Elias and his firm and filed a lawsuit to continue to bring further challenge under the Voting Rights Act and also under First Amendment and equal protection laws. And so, that is where we are now. Of course, it's in court, it's pending. It's been assigned to a judge, but, we're doing all the preliminary things that happen with lawsuits in federal court, such as, getting a scheduling order and getting discovery. But we're determined to keep this battle going, not just through litigation, but also through community efforts that we are seeing all around the state still happening, right? Even though the law has been passed, we have community organizations, community members in each of the counties still working to find a way to get this law repealed. And so that is kind of where we are. And the lawsuit does make allegations that under voting right, under Section 2, that the law as written and in practice will disproportionately impact, Black voters and other marginalized voters in this state. And some of the examples of that, we talk about, we're challenging the provision as it relates to criminalizing those supporters who provide water and what we call voter support at existing polls. And what we know in the state of Georgia is that the locations where voter support was required or needed were predominantly at Black and brown polling places. And so as a result of the long lines that were present 3-to-1 at Black polling places in comparison to some white polling places, we and other organizations began to make sure that at the polling sites, people had water. If it was cold, that people had hand warmers. so that they could stand in those lines. We provided food and support. And so instead of focusing on how can we build out infrastructure to provide more resources to make sure that communities of color have the number of polling precincts and the number of polling machines that would perhaps reduce the long hours, they focused on criminalizing the people who were providing the support to help those who were in line. And so we know just in practice in Georgia that those communities and the people they were targeting were those voting rights and civil rights organizations that were providing support to Black voters who by 3-1 were at longer lines unnecessarily in all of the election cycles last year. So that is one example that we believe they carefully crafted a bill that would create this issue. We also believe, that happened. We do know this time around, Black voters came out in large number, just not only in the general, but also in the runoff election. Well, it's no surprise that what they did was cut off 2 weeks of early voting for runoff elections, should one happen. We believe that is directly related to the number and outpouring of Black voters who participated in the elections last year, especially in the runoff election, which oftentimes in Georgia will happen, especially in statewide elections that are highly contested. You will more than likely be going into a runoff, and they are very aware of that. And we believe that change is directly targeted, at Black and Brown turnout. We also believe that some of the other things, such as now disqualifying provisional voting, because we know, there's far data that indicates that, when it comes to changing polling places, closing polling places, that happens more often in Black and Brown communities. And so provisional ballots becomes a very important tool to make sure that people are not disenfranchised and not permitted to vote. But by disqualifying provisional ballots all day, except for the 2 hours at the end of the day, we now are in a situation where it could be likely that we could lose votes because people who are not given the information, or because polling locations change, because that's something else they don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the fact that we also, as civil rights organizations in Georgia, had to fight tooth and nail because they, at the beginning of the year, in 2020, they began to close down polling precincts, and we had to fight to get them to open them back up. And some of them did not get opened back up. And that just creates problems for our communities to know where they're going. And so by disqualifying provisional balloting during the day hours could potentially disenfranchise thousands of voters. And they know that. So those are the kind of things that we're challenging. We're not challenging the provision that allows for states to take over county elections in the event they have what they believe to be credible allegations of fraud or mishandling. But even though our lawsuit doesn't specifically address that, we do believe that is another example where they're targeting. If you recall, during the quote unquote time when Trump was talking about the big lie, they were focusing on counties like Fulton County. They were focusing on counties like Clayton County. And that was intentional because, again, there are large swaths of African, and also DeKalb County, because there are large swaths of African-American voters in those counties. And so we do believe that this new provision that allows for county takeover, and by removing the Secretary of State from the State Board of Elections, is in actuality probably one of the worst provisions of the bill, because it could potentially allow for thousands of votes to be disqualified in the event we see the State Board of Election under this new provision deciding that, they don't like the outcomes of what these counties produce. So, those are just a couple of examples of things that we believe are targeting Black and Brown people disproportionately in this, with this particular bill that we are fighting against. And so I'm going to stop now. If there's any questions, I'll try to ask.
So thank you very much for that, April. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. And one of them is, if you can answer this, what happens to this law during the judicial process?
Well, there's, we ask for an injunction. We ask for injunctive relief. The court has not set that for a hearing yet, but we suspect it will happen shortly. And if we're granted that injunction while we bring forth the lawsuit, then the law will not go into effect. If the court does not agree, does not grant our preliminary injunction, then the law could go into effect. And so that is kind of, I can't recall right now, it's just because I'm not situated, what the date the law is supposed to go into effect, but we are seeking to have the law enjoined from enforcement as a part of our lawsuit.
Okay. Tara Doyle has a question. I saw that, and I just see if you could answer this. She says, so why aren't you contesting this in your lawsuit? Tara, can you expound on what this is? I'm not clear on that.
I think she's talking about the provision that allows for county takeover because we did not.
Okay.
As we, when you're filing a lawsuit as a plaintiff, you always have to make sure you can answer one question. The big question of the hour at the beginning stages of lawsuits is, do you have standing? What's the harm? What's the impact? And so the things that we cited in our lawsuit were those things that we believed as an organization we directly were impacted and involved in, right? Where our work was centered around. Our work was centered around providing voter support. Our work was centered around, which is directly linked to some of the provisions, in the statute. Our work has been centered around making sure that people have unfettered access to the ballot, whether it was by absentee during the runoff. So these are the things that our organizations specifically worked on. And so it permitted us to establish standing in a way that keeps the case alive so that we can get it to, we can get it prosecuted. There may be other plaintiffs, some counties themselves, who we believe at some point will bring their own lawsuits, because there are things that we heard throughout this entire process from counties that they believe would unduly burden counties who were trying to implement these, the requirements of this new law. So we do believe at some point you will have some counties who will, challenge, the autonomy of the county to do its own board. So, but we'll wait to see if that happens. But that's why we did not include it in our lawsuit.
Okay, thank you for that. And April, your presentation is greatly appreciated. I know that you are pressed for time and you're not able to stay for our entire meeting. Do you have time for one more question we can take?
Yes.
Okay. It says, why do not challenge the Board of Elections issue of the 202 bill?
The Board of Elections, I think, was that the same? I don't know what she's
okay.
If she's speaking
so
to
let's, yeah, I think that's the same. Now that I look at it, I think that's the same context that we're talking about. And then we know that there's a multitude of lawsuits out there. So one of the questions is, how many lawsuits are there out there? But I'm not quite sure of the amount. I know that there's several of them out there. Do you happen to know how many there are?
Right now, I'm aware that there are 3. There are, that ACLU has filed one along with LDF, I think ours, and then I think there's a total of 3 right now, which more than likely will be consolidated, which I think is even better because we'll be able to, consolidate our resources to challenge this bill. And hopefully in challenging this bill, and if we're successful in the state of Georgia, even if we have to continue to move forward in different courts to become successful, we might be able to address some of the other similar provisions that are making its way through legislation in other states. So, which in some iterations in those other states, they're even worse. So.
Right. Okay. Well, April, thank you again for the presentation and all of the information that you've given us to keep us informed and further inform us is we need that. So we appreciate you coming on and giving us this presentation. I want to just let everybody know that's in our meeting today that we have put the link for Black Voters Matter for the donation. If you'd like to donate, you all know that this work, it costs money, and we do need to help them in terms of not only the lawsuit, but continue the work, the grassroots efforts that they have been doing on the ground. The work never stops, not here in Georgia, but also across the United States. So if if you feel so inclined, please go to the link. It's blackvotersmatterfund.org/donate. And if you could do that, that will be greatly appreciated. Again, thank you, April. We appreciate it. And we also look to welcome you and Fanika back in the future to keep us apprised of what's going on in terms of what you can give us, in terms of information you can give us on the status of the lawsuit and how what else we can do to help move this forward. So thank you again. All right, and if you have any questions, further questions that we didn't address regarding SB 202 and the presentation that April gave, please continue to put your questions in the chat, and we'll take those questions and we will make sure that we get those answered. Even though we weren't able to answer them right at this moment, we'll get answers, we'll get back to you. So don't feel that you need to just hold those, because we want to keep you involved and engaged. All right, so we're going to move on, keeping the agenda moving. We have another presenter that I'm very excited about, and this is Zan Thornton. Zan is not only just a member of Necessary Trouble, but also one of the leaders of Georgia Adapt. And Georgia Adapt is a statewide disability rights grassroots organization. It uses civil resistance and principled nonviolence to end institutional biases. As I said, Zan is a member of Necessary Trouble, and she's one of the leaders. And Zan, I'm going to turn this space over to you now.
Thank you so much. I wanted to give a shout out to this group for getting us involved. Actually, we were looking for another group to get involved with, and then y'all came along, and then we found the SPLC. Then they asked us to join a lawsuit about this voting issues. And there's a whole process there that I can't go into, but because of us being involved with y'all, we got involved with other people that will hopefully lead to in about 2 or 3 weeks, we can tell you more. So I also want to thank Robin Shahar. She's been working with us terrifically on last minute notices, helping us guide us through these issues, because I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. I don't know the law. I know how to break it, and I know how to break it nonviolently. And I tease about that, but this law is going to affect us in a lot of different ways. But Georgia Adapt, the members that will be pursuing these possibilities will all be people of color. I need to describe me a little bit, is that I'm a white looking person. I identify as a Cherokee Two-Spirit. I use they or them, but you really can use any pronouns with me, I'm okay. And the background, there's a bunch of trees, and I have a tie-dye dog t-shirt on and gray hair that matches my gray earphones. So I'm caught up to date on the disability stuff. I'm caught up with the thanks. These laws are horrible, and they impact disabled people in many ways. One of them is curbside voting. A lot of people aren't aware that that is part of some of the legal stuff that is not being applied within Georgia. I had a friend in South Carolina, and they wouldn't do curbside voting for her. So she called the police, and the police came, made a report, and now she has a legal action against her polling place because they would not provide her curbside voting. I'm not the expert in that, but that's just one example. The other example of this law is that I call it the fox watches the hen house, whereas now the Secretary of State has been removed and the AG is going to be watching over stuff. And I'm maybe not saying it quite right, but I see this law as benefiting Republicans and trying to suppress the vote in Jim Crow 2.0. And what we do is Georgia Adapt. We're trying to get nationwide disability support to attack this suppression. But there's a lot of problems with this. Like if you're diabetic and you're in line, can the person next to you give you water? Can your partner give you water? Can your spouse give you water? Can your attendant give you water or food? We don't know. the time request for the absentee has shrunk, and so it's harder to get the absentee and get that process. I think Jessica was on here last time. Jessica Mathis, she's a Savannah Adapt, and for her to get her absentee ballot, her mailbox is not accessible, so she has to go out there and wait on the mail carrier to get her mail if she knows something really specific is coming through the mail. So she waited 6 days for her absentee ballot to come in, and then she had to wait to give it to him because she wanted to make sure that this carrier would take the ballot in. So there's a lot of fear, which I understand completely. And the other part of what Georgia Adapt does or did, and that's why we're involved with this stuff, is that rural people with disabilities don't have any transportation. And so we provided transportation, and Fair Fight gave us some money to provide transportation throughout the state. And so during doing that, we registered people to vote. We gave them water and food and stickers and had a great time. One woman said, I feel like I've voted for the first time in my life since my husband died. I'm like, explain. She said that the driver could go in and help her visually describe the ballot, because you go to the screen and then you have to do it on the screen, and then you have to print it. And then how does somebody blind read that? They don't. In fact, Georgia picked the machine that was not accessible. The National Federation of the Blind had picked a machine that could have been the most accessible option for anything. And then Georgia, of course, didn't pick that. So the woman said, when my husband's alive, he would read it to me. But now that he's gone and I'm alone, it's hard to find somebody to take me to the poll. It's hard to find me somebody that will read the stuff and treat me like an elder. And she said this is the first time in 30 years that she felt like her vote counted. So that's kind of a summary. I can't tell you a whole lot right now because what we're getting involved to. That's why I ask about the different lawsuits, because there's a lot of them coming along, and that there are several groups of disabled that are be part of them. I'd like to say the other thing is that the IDs, there's an interesting twist on that. Georgia says that you can get free IDs from a mobile system they have. And I'm like, I've never seen that. I've never heard that. Have anybody seen a mobile ID? And the other thing is that they said is that the mobile voting is going to be limited. I first of all have never seen them do the mobile voter, the mobile ID thing, which I think is non-existent. And I've never seen them do the mobile. And in the paper I received, it's, I think, RV. So I get nervous when talking. I'd rather tell stories. But for me and our family, this bill is going to make it hard for our members and our family members to vote. And that I drink a lot of water and I bring a lot of water and I give it away. But the whole summary of it is such a blow to Georgia to show how bad the Republicans can be. And I do blame the Republicans. I won't be nonpartisan on that. But excuse me, we will do whatever it takes to help stop Jim Crow too, whether it's protest, whether it's arrest, whether it's seeking a legal action. But we're here to do what is necessary, what is good trouble. Any questions?
So thank you, Zan. And thank you for articulating that. You did a really excellent job of doing that. I think many of us, just what you described, had never thought about how it impacts the disabled community. And I know just when I look at articles, there's one just I recall from the Augusta Chronicle where a gentleman said that the Georgia voting bills would be collateral damage for the disability community. And it's a wonderful article. If you can just do a search on Georgia's voter bills and the disabled community, and you'll come up with many articles. You did a great job. Thank you for that. So let's see, do we have any questions for Zan?
I did post the Time
yeah.
article that I think is somewhat of what the Albany article is about. It was Galen Tootle who said this is unimaginable, terrible. And he's going to do everything he can, including protest. He's never really got into protesting, and he's agreed to come join with us when we protest. So we're really happy about that. Other questions?
No questions right now, but if Zan, thank you, much gratitude. And if you have any questions that you think of, please put them in the chat and we'll address them at a later time. Thank you, Zan. We're going to move on. We're doing good on the agenda, I think, Becky. I hope so. On time. We do have. Yes, please do. Go ahead, Robin.
So what's really interesting to me is when people talk, like people on who are more Republicans and say, "Oh, the bill isn't so bad." Forget what's in the bill. What they don't even understand is before the bill was passed, there were huge challenges for the disabled community, for people who don't have transportation, poor people to vote. So the baseline was already really difficult. And so this just makes it even harder. I just don't want to lose sight of where we came from, which was poor to begin with.
That's a great point, Robin. Thank you for bringing that up. Again, one of the things that I just took away from Zan was how she illustrated it for me in words that I had, and descriptions of that I had not thought about, that have given me purpose to think even further in terms of how these bills are impacting the larger space in society, not just what I think of those that are in my space. So thank you again for that, Zan, and thank you for that comment, Robin. Okay, if there aren't any more comments or questions, we are going to move on. We have awesome speakers today, in case you haven't noticed. I hope you're enjoying this session thus far. I surely am. We have another amazing presenter, and this is going to be Syra Draper from she's the Voter Protection Director of the Democratic Party of Georgia. And Necessary Trouble has had a long history of working with Syra and her team. As you all know, they did an amazing job. I mean, amazing, incredible, astonishing, all of those adjectives in 2020 and the 2021 runoffs. They cured over 20,000 provisional ballots for the general election. So I'm going to introduce Syra, and she is going to be talking about the implications of SB 202 and how her team plans to respond. But I'd also like to say that on a personal note, I got to work with Syra and her team as a voter protection coordinator in Gwinnett County. And it was one of the best experiences that I've had as an activist and an organizer, learning more about the voting process and how it works. And as you know, we turned Gwinnett so blue that the Republicans are awesomely angry with us. So it was large in part to Syra and her team. And whenever I had major questions, I would just be able to turn to her and she would immediately respond to me. So I am so happy to introduce Syra Draper. Syra, this is your space now.
Judy, thank you so much. That was such a lovely introduction. We value our relationship with Necessary Trouble so much. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've called at the last minute saying, hey, would you guys mind, would someone be available for XYZ? And every single time, y'all have delivered and more. So it's such an amazing partnership and it's so good to be here. Sorry, we're having some difficulties here. So I missed the first part of the first presenter, and what my intention was for today was to go over SB 202 in a little bit of detail, because the most important thing is, before we figure out how to activate our networks against SB 202 is to understand what SB 202 does. However, if the first presenter went over any of this, I will make sure to keep it really short. The intention is to go over what SB 202 does. I'm sorry, I'm just going to deliver him because he is not cooperating like I thought he might. I'll be right back. Sorry.
Sure, no problem, Syra. And if in terms of voter protection, while we're waiting for Syra, if you have any questions that have already come to mind, please go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will make sure that they get addressed. And if we can't get to all of them, as we said before, we'll get to you post this meeting.
Okay.
And the wonderful thing is, I like to see this. We women have babies, so, but she's still going full force.
Maybe during the pandemic, it's been a special time. Okay, so let's just get into the presentation. Let's just dive in, and people can interrupt with questions. And if y'all need me to move on because you've already covered some of this stuff, you're not going to offend me. Just tell me to move on. We'll get to the next thing. All right, so I'm going to share the screen. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
All right, fabulous. Okay, so SB 202, where do we go from here? And I am opening up my screen so I can see you all. I look to you all for feedback. So let me just make sure I open that up really big. Okay. All right, so where do we go from here? So Robin just touched on this a minute ago, well, and Zan did too, but I just want us all to be on the same page, because Republicans have been saying this isn't so bad. It is that bad. The lies about the election and the fairness of the election were the groundwork that Republicans laid to be able to move us back. Those things did not happen, but they brought Rudy Giuliani down to Georgia. Trump spoke about Georgia. They propagated these lies so that they would have a basis for saying we need to make changes. And the changes that they have made, well, there's a few good things in that 98 pages of comprehensive election reform, a couple good things, and they like to mention those. But overall, it's overwhelmingly bad, and it turns back, the progress that we have made in a pretty significant way. So as I mentioned before, first step is, now that this has been released and it's only been law for less than a month now, first thing is to really understand what it does, because until we understand what it does, we can't start planning against it. So here we go, presentation outline. So we're going to talk about what SB 202 does. Then I'll touch briefly on some of the lawsuits and federal legislation, and then last we'll talk about what we can do. And again, if you've heard this, please just let me know, and we'll move through it faster. Okay, so for the purposes of this presentation, SB 202 does a whole bunch of stuff, but I've divided it into 6 main categories to kind of capture what it does to different aspects of voting. So we will talk about these 6 aspects of voting and how the law has changed. So starting with mail-in voting, and I heard this mentioned just a moment ago, but one of the biggest changes to mail-in voting is that the timeline to vote has been significantly compressed. That is bad news for voters, but it's also very bad news from the perspective of the election office. They have less time to prepare, to process applications, to fix mistakes, to deal with the public, to process ballots upon their return. So just everything they are doing is rushed. And unfortunately, so much of what they're doing is now having to take place at the same time as in-person voting is taking place. So before, there was a good chunk of processing that happened well before in-person voting started, so they could pretty much devote a lot of their bandwidth and manpower to focusing on absentee balloting. But now, because the absentee balloting and the in-person stuff happened more or less around the same time, it just means less bandwidth for both. So whereas before you could apply for your absentee ballot 180 days before an election, now that has been slashed by less than half. You have to apply 78 days before or less. And if you apply outside of that window, your application will be rejected. Another change, which is a decent change actually, is that there is a deadline to apply for that absentee ballot. So before, the deadline was the Friday before the election, which was too late. I didn't like that deadline because it gave folks false hopes. If somebody was applying for an application that Friday before the election, there was no way they were going to get their ballot in time for their vote to count. Now that deadline has been moved to 11 days before the election. So it's a little bit earlier than I would have liked, but I think that's actually an improvement over the 3-day deadline. Our challenge will be telling everybody about it and making sure that the people who can only vote by mail know that this deadline is so early, so they can go ahead and get their applications in early. So I'm thinking about folks who cannot vote in person. Perhaps they have a physical disability so that it would be difficult to go into the polling place, or perhaps it's somebody who does not live in Georgia who will not be here when they're voting. Those folks need to know that that application deadline is coming up a lot earlier. Okay, so still in the category of mail-in voting, your ballot, when your ballot can be returned, is also compressed. And that's mostly because those ballots don't go out till much later in the process. So before, ballots would start going out 7 weeks before an election. And so people would have time for the ballot to get to them. Maybe the ballot would sit on the kitchen table for a week or two. You'd think about your choices. You'd send it back in, and it still got back in time, with plenty of time to be there before the deadline. Now they won't be mailed until 4 weeks before the election. And you know, the reason timing, of course, is so important is because Georgia is a received by state. Your absentee ballot must be received by the deadline in order to count. It is not good enough to put it in the mail by election day. It actually has to be received. So it will be very important for people to be returning those ballots as soon as they receive them. All right, the ID requirements have changed, both for applying for your absentee ballot and for submitting your ballot. So whereas before we used a signature process, you know, there were problems with the signature process. Those of you that have worked on the voter protection hotline certainly know there were problems with the signature process. But the nice thing about the signature process is it didn't require anything extra, any extra documentation or numbers. It was just you signing your application and signing your ballot and going from there. Now that has changed. So they're requiring for both the application and ballot a Georgia driver's license number. And if you don't have a Georgia driver's license number, you can get an ID from your elections office. If you don't want to do that, you can also submit a photocopy of an ID that would work for voting in person. So there's a number of different IDs that would work for voting in person. You can include a photocopy of one of those with your application, and you'll be able to apply for your absentee ballot. So that does complicate, you know, applying for your absentee ballot. And it also just changes in a very significant way. I do think the counties there's going to be some confusion too, because they're now asking for a lot of information on that absentee ballot, the envelope. They're asking for date of birth. They're asking for you to sign it, even though they're not basing the eligibility on your signature. They're asking for your address. They're asking for that Georgia driver's license number. So there's a lot of information on there. And what we have seen in the past is when they ask for a lot of information. In 2018, for instance, they were asking for, goodness, I can't remember now if it was date of birth or if it was the day that you signed your absentee ballot, but for whatever, people were getting it wrong. They were putting the wrong thing, and counties were rejecting ballots on that basis, even though that wasn't a proper basis on which to reject a ballot. So what we see is when there's more fields, there's just more opportunity for people who, you know, either not necessarily intentionally, but just not knowing what disqualifies a vote ballot and what doesn't. There's more opportunity for them to reject those ballots. Okay, I think we covered that. Right, so you probably remember in June of last year when the Secretary of State sent out 7 million applications to voters so that they could apply for their absentee ballot during the pandemic. The Republicans didn't like that Brad did that. They said, That got people really used to voting by mail. They really liked it, and then they kept doing it. You shouldn't have done that. So they have now prohibited the government from sending out applications to vote by mail. So that's your counties. I know DeKalb County did that last year, and several other counties did it for the general election, and it includes the Secretary of State as well. Now, third-party groups can still send out applications to vote by mail to voters. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later and whether we think that's a good idea. Drop boxes. This is actually one of the biggest losses. And the thing about drop boxes is they made voting by mail, they brought confidence to the process. Because when you return those ballots by the US Post, especially the US Post as it was last year with all the problems we were seeing, people don't know when the county is going to receive it. In some counties, your ballot gets back in 2 days, in some counties it gets back in 2 weeks, and some it never gets there. But when you put your absentee ballot in a drop box, you know with certainty that your county has received it that day. So that was one of the great things about drop boxes. While Republicans said, I see something good, let's undo it. So they have made drop boxes what I would describe functionally obsolete at this point. Whereas before they could be located outside and be available 24/7 so that you could access it, say after work or whatever it is. Now they must be inside in an early voting location and only available while that early voting location is open. So if you're going to an early voting location when it's open, you may as well vote in person at that point, right? Like all the convenience of the drop box is basically gone. And I think what a lot of people have missed, what a lot of people have missed is that the drop box will not be available on the Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before an election. So those are the 3 days where you want to know that your ballot has arrived in time, but drop boxes will not be available on those dates because there is no early voting on those dates. Therefore, the drop boxes aren't available. So that is a really big loss, and that is a big opportunity for education for us there, because we do not want people thinking that they can use a drop box in those last few days. All right. Okay, so hours. You might hear Republicans saying that hours have actually been expanded on this bill, under this bill. That might be true. So now they're making every county have hours that are consistent. They either have to be 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. during the weekdays, or you can even extend to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. That won't make a difference for most of us in metro counties. But if you live in a smaller county, you may very well have expanded hours. So the effect of this change is really to, increase hours in smaller communities, and we want voting to be more accessible to everybody. So we think that's a good change. Originally, the bill said that Sundays it would be prohibited to offer in-person voting on Sundays. Yay to activists for pushing that out of the bill. That is no longer part of the bill. Counties have the opportunity to be open both Sundays during early vote, and they must be open both Saturdays. Must have at least one location that is open. All right, no mobile units. I heard us mentioning, I think it was Dan who was mentioning the mobile units. That was something that was just in Fulton County. I mean, they talk about, being creative and thinking outside the box. They took 2 buses, they put a bunch of voting machines in them, and then they went out to the communities every single day of early vote for 3 weeks. They went out to rec centers, to community centers, to churches, wherever it was, and they brought voting to you. You might recall the phone call between President Trump and Brad Raffensperger, where Trump said, find me 11,000 more votes, just find me 11,000 more votes. Well, Fulton County netted over 11,000 votes on those buses, on those mobile voting units. They were able to get 11,000 votes on those things. The legislature has now said that is prohibited. No real good reason why, other than it worked for voters and it was convenient. Okay, so this is a good change. More notice is required when there's going to be polling place changes. They're going to require more advanced notice, and there's also going to be some requirements for the signs that they post. They have to be of a certain size so that folks can actually see them. That's going to be a really good thing because there's going to be a lot of changes. So with redistricting coming up, we are going to see a lot of polling place changes, and we're just going to see a lot of polling place changes from this year because there were so many changes because of COVID this year. So we're going to see a lot of changes. Notice of these changes is good. Of course, we'll still want to organize and have folks, with signs telling people, no, not this location, go to this location. Your location has changed. Ballot processing deadline. So this is something they're continuing from last year. They're allowing counties to process absentee ballots 2 weeks in advance. That's a good thing so that they can get a jump start on processing those applications and that elections won't go on for so long after election day has come and gone. But one change that they've made now is they're saying once election day hits, counties must continue processing those ballots until they're done. So literally no sleep. There's a no sleep rule. They must continue until it's finished. I can't think of any bad things that would happen if you're working 36 hours straight and counting ballots. I can't think of anything bad that would happen at all. But the point here is that they really want to rush that process and get those ballots counted more quickly. And they have moved up the certification deadlines as well. Okay, so county election office. So one thing that they are doing that is a little bit different, before they used to have a requirement that if for every 250 registered voters in a precinct, they would require at least one BMD, that's the ballot marking device, the touch screen where you vote. That was so that you would have a minimum number of devices, that was congruent with the number of voters in a precinct. That was a good thing. But now, I guess counties have been given more latitude. So that is still the requirement when it's a statewide general election, but for any other kind of election, counties have the flexibility to offer less machines if that's what they want to do. We will see how that works out. Often when counties are given discretion to do things, as they want to, some make good use of that discretion and others don't. No, okay, this is a big one. So no outside funding is permitted anymore. So last year during COVID, outside funding was an absolute lifeline. Not just because of COVID, but there were so many unexpected costs that came up. For instance, we had 3 recounts, right? There were so many unexpected costs that hit, and really well-meaning organizations came out there and said, let us help your election administration costs. These were nonpartisan groups. These were groups that gave to red counties, blue counties. It didn't matter. They were funding things like extra staff. They were funding things like extra locations. They were funding things like PPE. And it was a lifeline to many, many Georgia counties. That has been prohibited. And we'll talk about this a little bit at the end when we talk about what can we do, because this is going to be, we have to make sure that counties receive the money that they need from their budgets now, because there's nobody that's going to be coming in at the last minute that says, here, take, $500,000 more for extra staff. That's just not going to happen anymore. All right, poll watchers will now be receiving training. We at the Democratic Party of Georgia have always given lots of training to our poll watchers. So I guess now Republicans will receive some too. And then a change is that poll workers, you may now serve in adjoining counties. So the rule before was that you could only be a poll worker in the county in which you were registered. Now you can be a poll worker in your county or any adjoining county, which just gives them more staffing flexibility. Okay, so these are some changes now to the state election board, which are pretty substantial changes. So overall, the theme here is that the role of the Secretary of State has been diminished. And again, this comes from the fact that the legislature is very, very angry with Mr. Raffensperger. The Secretary of State will no longer be the chairman of the state election board, and he will no longer have a vote at state election board meetings. State election board, for those of you who don't know, is a really powerful body in that they have the ability to promulgate rules about how elections are administered, and those rules have the force of law. So you have law coming from the legislature, but you also have the equivalent of law coming from the state election board. Who has a vote on that panel is extremely important. And then I'm sure everyone has heard about the state takeover provision. This basically says that, if a county is underperforming, the state election board has the ability to appoint somebody, to put somebody in who will take over. Really concerning when you think about the fact that counties have election boards for the most part that have been appointed or who have been elected, whatever the process is. But those folks are accountable to the county, to the citizens of the county. And now you have a state election board that can just put somebody in, replace those folks who are accountable to citizens. Challenges. I just add this in here. I mean, this was a big deal right before the January runoff. We had over, I think it was almost 400,000 Georgians that were challenged by an organized Republican group from Texas. They came in here and said, let's start challenging and basically cause a ruckus in the days right before the runoff election, when election offices had so much other stuff to deal with. The Georgia legislature has basically taken what was a somewhat ambiguous statute, and they're saying, hey, challenges are okay. If you are allowed to challenge as many voters as you want, and if somebody makes a challenge, they must be heard in a timely manner before the election. All right, runoffs. So this one is a very, very big deal, especially when you think about what we were able to achieve in our Senate runoff in January. So the way it worked before was that federal runoffs took place 9 weeks after the general election, and anything that wasn't a federal runoff took place 4 weeks after the general election. Now, if you recall, Daniel Blackman's race was 4 weeks after the general election. And the Secretary of State stepped in and he said, we can't do this. We have recount after recount. We still have to do an audit. There's so much going on. Let's just move the Blackman race and let's have it 9 weeks out with those Senate races. Another big change this year is that we're using new elections equipment, right? So the fact that we have this new elections equipment that creates that paper receipt means that you can have these audits. It means that you can have these recounts, and that when you're doing a hand recount, that takes time. So basically, we're in a very different position now than we were before when we did runoffs 4 weeks after an election. So, if we wanted to move combined runoffs, it would have made sense to move them to all be 9 weeks, or maybe move them to 6 weeks after the election. Instead, what the legislature has done in its infinite wisdom is moved all runoffs to 4 weeks after the election. So that would have been like having the Warnock and Ossoff election 4 weeks after the general election. I don't think it's possible. It's going to be really hard for our counties to administer a general election, do all the post-election work and certification that has to be done, and simultaneously do early vote for the next election, right? And that, of course, is the process. That, of course, is the point. When your county doesn't have the bandwidth, they're just not going to offer as much early voting, right? They're not going to be processing those absentee ballots for the runoff because they're still going to be working on the general election. So this is a pretty devastating change. And one thing to note, they only require 5 days of early voting. So whereas for the general, it requires 3 weeks of early voting, these runoffs will now only require 5 days. And where you have Thanksgiving, it'll only be 3 days. It'll only be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So this is a very big change. Okay, and then the line warming. I know we've mentioned that, but no line warming. You can't be providing food or water in the way that we could before, which of course was in a nonpartisan way and not in return for a vote. Okay, I think we're getting towards the end here of this, and I know it's been a little bit lengthy. And Becky, I see you there. You can tell me to hurry up if I'm taking too long.
Syra, we love you. And if you could do maybe about 6 more minutes.
Definitely.
Doable.
Yep. Okay, provisional ballots. You've probably heard this one before. It's going to be a huge change. So in the past, on election day, not early vote, but on election day, you have to go to your precinct, right? If you don't go to your precinct, but you're still in your county, they'll allow you to vote a provisional ballot, and that provisional ballot will count. Okay, you don't have to do anything. They'll count that provisional ballot after they make sure that you're in the right county. Now what they're saying is, if you are not in your precinct on election day, and you ask to vote a provisional ballot, if it's before 5 p.m., that provisional ballot will not count. If it's after 5 p.m., they will make you sign a statement that's where you swear you cannot get to your proper precinct on time. And only if you sign that, then will you be allowed to vote a provisional ballot that supposedly will count. I don't know how we're supposed to hold counties accountable to this. I see so many ways. I mean, to me, counties are just going to say no provisional ballots, right? They're just going to stop giving provisional ballots because it's so complex. The other part that really worked, the people who voted out of precinct provisional ballots last cycle, it was 2-1 Democrats. So that's why they are doing this. This is going to be something that hurts us in a very, very major way. And the way to avoid this, of course, is to have people go vote early, not wait till election day, because during early vote, you can vote wherever you want. All right, so I'm moving ahead. Here's what I'm going to say about these lawsuits. And I know y'all touched on this a little bit earlier. The main point I want to make with both the lawsuits and the federal legislation, HR 1 and HR 4, is that it is not a cure-all. Okay, like even if these things are successful, they might fix some parts of SB 202. They are not going to fix all of it. So I mention that because I want us to keep our heads on straight. We still have to do the work, the organizing, the planning, because this is not going to fix everything. Okay.
Thank you so much, Syra.
Yes.
Here, okay, go ahead, proceed.
All right, this is the 2 last minutes. All right, so I think one of the really important things that we do going on, vote by mail worked so well for Democrats last year. We had a messaging change last year about vote by mail, whereas before it was like 5% of people voted by mail. Last year, we pushed everyone to do it. I think we have to have a big conversation about whether that is our approach this year, because they have very effectively made it much more difficult. And we have to figure out whether it's something that everybody should be doing or whether we limit it to folks that really just need to vote by mail. And we encourage everybody else to vote in person. And I think being consistent as progressive groups, as Democrats, progressive groups, whatever it is, we have to have consistent messaging there and not contradict each other. But that's going to be very important. We have to get to a place where we're all on the same page with that. IDs, for anybody that you do know that has to vote by mail, get those IDs now, whether it's your Georgia driver's license, whether it's the voter ID that you get through your elections office. Let's start doing it now because it will be very difficult to get it around election time. Dropbox education, vote by mail education generally, but we have to tell people that they cannot rely on drop boxes in the same way that they did in the past. That's going to be very, very important. And then lastly, expanding early in-person voting is going to be the #1 way to compensate for the restrictions that are being made in other places. So how do we expand early voting? It means holding our Board of Elections members accountable, pushing for that with our boards of elections members. It means making sure that the county commission gives enough money to the boards of elections so they can open more early voting locations across the county, right? And so that they have enough staff to staff all those elections, early voting locations. So those are the things that we have to do now to make sure that we have more early voting locations. And I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, Syra. That was amazing. First of all, there was a question about getting a copy of the PowerPoint, and this is recorded, so we'll get a copy of the PowerPoint if it is needed. But I want to just give you a great big shout out, Syra. Thank you so much, not only for giving us a really specific and articulate information, giving us articulate information about SB 202 from a voter protection perspective, but while also you were doing something else representing women, and that is, in my opinion, you just demonstrated juggling motherhood while still shining as a woman, and showing that how many hats that we wear as women. And you are just amazing with the information, and you're doing actionable work and involving us in doing that actionable work. So we've got a lot of questions for you in the chat. And I'm going to say, if you have some time, I know your hands are full right now, but if you have some time to look at those questions and you can answer those in the chat, we would be greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much, Syra, and we look forward to having you back to present to us again as we move through this process with this bill and these Georgia bills.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So the questions that you all have, if you haven't already put them in the chat for Syra, please continue to do so. And if she's not able to answer them while we're still in this meeting, we will make sure we get those questions and get back to you after the meeting. We have had really phenomenal speakers today and presenters. This is one of the reasons that I am so thrilled to be a part of Necessary Trouble, is because I am always gleaning something new, even though I think I have the information. As I said, I was a voter protection coordinator for Gwinnett County and relied on Syra for information last year. But I've gleaned new information just in listening to her. So I am thankful for this, and I am now going to turn it over back to the lovely Becky Butler, and we're going to continue on. She's going to talk further about criminal justice reform. Over to you. It's your space now, Becky.
All right, Judy, thank you so much. Thank you for navigating us through that. And enormous gratitude. I am so aware of the richness of resources that we have in this group, with Judy and Zan and all the others, and also our partners, and the kind of forces of nature that we have working in Georgia right now. And I want to say one more thing before we turn away from the issue of voter protection. Aquaria Richardson Smith has just, we are really appreciative that she is joining Martha Laird in leading the voter protection team for troublers. And so they will be in touch with Syra and her team. And when there are actionable items that we can work on related to this issue, if you are not already on Martha Laird's voter protection email list, and if you want now to be part of that team that Aquaria and Martha will be leading together, if you would put in the chat, if you would put your name and the words voter protection. And that way, when there is action to be taken, when Syra's team is ready for volunteers, when Fair Fight is ready for volunteers, if you would, they will let you know. So put your name in the chat, put the term voter protection in there, and they'll be in touch when there's work to be done. So we are now, with great gratitude for all the presenters we've heard, we are going to turn to the next section of the meeting. And the next section of the meeting is another area that is hugely important for Necessary Trouble, and that is criminal justice reform, which is heavy in our hearts and large in our minds, particularly this week. And I'm going to turn this right now over to Robin Shahar, who has been chairing the Necessary Trouble Criminal Justice Reform Work Group. Robin, can you unmute yourself? And I'm going to turn this over to you.
Yes, thank you, Becky, and thanks to everyone. I'm going to keep this very, very short. We could talk about it more at a different meeting, because the person who's going to follow me is a wonderful member of our committee, Laura Nieto, and I really want to give her a chance to take the time that she is, for all of you to hear her story. What I want to say briefly is that we are doing a project that looks at how public safety is dealing with folks who have behavioral health issues, meaning mental illness, drug and alcohol issues, and intellectual and developmental disabilities. And there is a movement that has started. There are a handful of entities in Georgia and others around the country where police departments or sheriff's offices are partnering with mental health, behavioral health providers for two reasons. One, when a 911 call comes in and the basis of it is a behavioral health related issue, these units, which instead of having two police go out as partners, you have a partnership of public safety and behavioral health, and they go out together with the goal being that people who are really dealing with a behavioral health issue, the answer is not to put them in the criminal justice system. The answer is to have them treated within a behavioral health model. So number one, it helps keep people out of prison or jail and out of the criminal justice system to begin with. And the second component of that is a follow-up piece that helps, no, it's not PAD, by the way, that helps people be stabilized after the initial incident, getting community support so that they can stay out of the criminal justice system. We've got a great team of people working on it, and I'm happy to talk about it again in the future. One quick example, just to Rayshard Brooks this summer, who was asleep in a Wendy's parking lot, at Wendy's drive-through because he was drunk. And simply, the first cop came and he asked to just leave his car and walk to his sister's house. Second cop came and it became an altercation. They wanted to arrest him. There was no need to arrest him. He ended up shot in the back and killed. With a behavioral health unit, a partnership with police and behavioral health, that would not have happened. He would have gone to his sister's house, and there would have been a follow-up team the next day that would have reached out to him to see how he could be supported. I'm going to leave it there for now and come back another time. And I'd like to turn it over to Laura.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be reading most of the time because it helps me to communicate much better. My name is Laura Nieto, and I'm originally from Ecuador. And I would like to thank you for allowing me to read my feature story, A Journey of Mental Illness and Incarceration. In January 2020, last year, I returned to Agnes College, my alma mater, to take a graduate course in journalism in the digital age with the well-known Southern writer Melissa Green. I must add that it was a very challenging course, but very rewarding at the end. At the beginning of the semester, I began thinking about the topic of my feature story. I thought it would be great to answer the questions that I have been in my mind for a while. Why are mentally ill in prisons? Why are they in prisons? And the other one is, should not they be in a psychiatry hospital? Okay, thank you. I did an extensive research on mental health in prisons at the federal and state level, but as my teacher guided us into the elements of nonfiction to be about my son. So it was clear that my feature story was going to be about my son's tragic story. This story is of a young, handsome, intelligent man diagnosed at the age of 20 with schizophrenia while studying to become an architect at Georgia Tech. And his desperate mother sees her son slipping into a deep psychosis, unable to save her son from getting into trouble with the law. I would like to show you the picture of my son. All right. This is a tragedy as his mother's worst fears happened. And I would like to read some part of it, and I hope you will be able to read the entire feature story at your own pleasure. I appreciate the comments of the most progressive, tremendous district attorney in Georgia, Deborah Gonzalez. I am quoting her reply after she read this story. She says, "Good morning, Laura. Thank you for your gracious reply. One thing that I will tell you is don't stop talking about your son and his story. Tell everyone you can. Say to the world, it is a story that must be told so that change can happen." So I would like to read some paragraphs related to that. Why is this story important now? 40% of people in the United States suffer from serious mental illness. It is a big secret. Independent Lens Video, PBS, April 2020. You will find that information. This is a 10 pages. It's a very long feature story, but I'm going to read just a couple paragraphs so you will have an idea. I started first with the first day in prison visiting my son, but it's very dark, so I decided to skip that, but I'm going to go to what happened. The day the lights went off in our lives. It was a Thursday evening in February 1999. As I was sitting down in my favorite chair after a long day of work to watch the CNN evening news, the phone rang. I was annoyed and hesitant to answer it. I thought, who would be calling this late? I answered, and there was a strong voice on the line saying, "This is the police. I am looking for William's mother." I said, "This is she. I need to report you that your son is in the hospital." My heart stopped. I could not breathe, couldn't talk. My son has never during his entire life of 20 years of life been in the hospital, except when he was born. He was kept in the incubator for 8 days because of some complications with the liver. He's a healthy person, a well-educated, well-traveled. He was born in Germany in 1979, and the people there love him so much. His big, chubby cheeks, black eyes, and beautiful smile radiated joy and happiness. And here's a picture of my son when he was a child. I got very quiet. I didn't know what to say. Words didn't come out of my mouth. I did not feel anything, as if my body was paralyzed. The boy said, "Are you there?" And I finally says, "I'm here." What is happening to him? The officer explains that my son, William, was involved in a car accident, left his car at the site of the accident, and kept running completely naked to the Emory Crawford Lung Hospital, now known as Emory University Hospital, Midtown. I asked myself, what was he running naked to the hospital? Is he hurt? If he was running, then he's alive. I told myself. I was driving very fast to get to the hospital. I got to the hospital and I said I had received a call from the police officer who told me my son is here. The receptionist says, yes, he's here. Suddenly I saw the still body, my son's body, in this bed covered with the white sheets. Gave me an impression looking at the dead body, but he was not dead. He was sedated. Mental illness, hearing voices, equals schizophrenia, said the doctor. The National Institute of Mental Health states that schizophrenia is a devastating illness, a brain disease that stands unique just like cancer. But schizophrenia affects how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. People with schizophrenia may seem like they have lost touch with reality, which causes significant distress for the individual, their family members, and friends. It has the potential to destroy the process of the mind. My son, total loss of motivation, lack of enjoyment in daily activities, and socially withdrawn, indicate his mind was entering a major depressive episode of psychosis. I call it dark tunnel. I was scared because I feared he might hurt himself or other people. I knew that I had to take immediately action. After a psychiatry evaluation, October 30, 2009, he was admitted to Emory Clinic. His behavior was erratic. He was not talking, but moving around wildly. He was calm with shots to put him in the sedated state. He will be stabilized and then he will be discharged in a week or two, I thought, but it was obvious to me that this time it was going to be different. My son became more and more agitated, and after being accused of hitting a nurse, he was recommended to transfer to Pitchford Psychiatry Hospital for a better treatment on November 3rd, 2009. 14 days later, on November 16, 2009, we were at the CVS pharmacy where we pick up my son's medication. When he headed we headed to a restaurant, a Thai restaurant. We had been released. He has been released after 14 days in a psychiatric hospital. His insurance did not cover his stay any longer. They only gave him 14 days. The news was not good. He did not look anything better that he went in the hospital. As the waitress in the restaurant, we were late. the menu in front of us, and my son was looking at it. I had a chance to really look at him, to my son. He was still handsome, his beautiful smile, his sweet and natural personality, full of kindness and trust, big eyes, still there. He looked like a broken glass that has been glued back together. He ordered pad thai with tofu. I had decided to become a vegetarian, he said. Schizophrenia episodes in my son's life just destroyed his life. For a while, he was doing well, taking classes in mathematics, working as an accounting clerk, and in his spare time, he entertained himself playing chess, painting with watercolors. During Christmas time, he loved to build beautiful gingerbread house. I thought he was healing, and he could return to Georgia Tech to finish his architect studies and finally conquer the only dream he had since he was 5 years old, to be an architect. Later that same evening, 7 p.m. in November 16, I found him talking to his wife on the phone. Her name is Stephanie. We agree with my son not to call her until he gets stabilized, mentally stabilized. There was a serious event that took place before he entered the Emory Hospital. The police had been called twice due to domestic incidents. That took place at their home. We ended up homeless with his laptop, phone, clothes, unable to communicate with others or me. His wife is schizophrenic as well, threw his belongings into a dumpster and told him, don't ever come back. After this event, a physical separation between both of them was the best to stop the abuse between them. At midnight on the November 16th, Stephanie, his wife, came to my home indicator looking for my son with a policewoman. This is midnight. After William has called his wife, she decided she wants her husband back. Is William here? His wife is outside and wants her husband out, the police said. I responded, please lower your voice and I will explain to you what is going on. He is mentally ill and he was just discharged from Pitchfork Psychiatric Hospital today. He needs some time and space to heal. Unfortunately, for some reason, the police kept going into the next room, my home, and find my son sitting in the chair with his head down. He said, no, I don't want to go back with her. After midnight, after the police and Stephanie left, my son became very agitated. At one point, he came very close to me, pushed me against the glass window and looked at me directly into my eyes. I felt a terrible fear of attack. My own son was about to attack me. I spoke to him very calmly. If you hurt me, you will go to prison, I said to him. I knew I couldn't defend myself against a 6 foot tall, 175 pounds man who earned a black belt in Taekwondo. Anyway, the paramedics came because his blood pressure was extremely high. Took him to the DeKalb General Hospital. I begged them to take him back to Pitchford Psychiatry Hospital, but they say we do not go to that side of town. My son ran away from the ambulance when the door was open at the hospital. The police tried to find him, and finally he did find it. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Took him to the hospital, but by the time I got to the hospital, he had run away from the hospital again. Nobody was able to find him. I finally got a call at 7 a.m. in the morning. He looked exhausted. He has been running all night in the neighborhood around the hospital, barefoot. His feet looked hurt and bleeding. He was shaking and cold, and his arms were stuck inside his t-shirt. He fell asleep in a car while giving a ride home. I looked at him in disbelief. I felt helpless, not able to minimize his suffering. At home, I watched his feet. He couldn't stand enough to take a shower. Took his medication and had a cup of milk. He was calm now. He was very thankful. He said, "Thank you, Mom," with this incredible humility. The next morning, on the 18th, I got out of bed, went straight to my son's bedroom to check on him, and realized he was gone, and my car keys as well. I panicked. This strange feeling took over me, and deep in my heart, I sensed something terrible was about to take place. He is dangerous to himself and others, I told the Decatur police. Please help me. They were more interested in reporting a lost car, and he has stolen your car, he said. It is a long story and many different facts in there that took place. I know I cannot go unless you read the whole thing, it will make sense. But the day of his arrest, you can imagine what happened when he arrived. As he entered the police car, he seemed disconnected from what was taking place. He lacked emotions. He was just breathing enough to sustain himself. Was he imagining if what he was seeing was true or false? Perhaps his psychosis did not permit him to feel fear, but only hear commands, what the police was telling him to do. On the day of his arrest, I remember well his first psychotic episode of schizophrenia in the spring of 1990, running naked from Georgia Tech to the Emory Hospital. He explains later, "The devil got into me. I heard voices, says, do it. So I drank a beer with my meds. I was trying to save my own life after taking an overdose of my own medication. I knew I had to go to the hospital. I did not want to die. I realized I did something wrong by taking overdoses of Paxil, the medication prescribed for depression. 20 years later had passed since the fateful car accident, which led my son to diagnosis of schizophrenia. The long process of adapting and healing is still ongoing. He has been out and in of psychiatric hospitals, had private counseling. He has been in many types of medication in an effort to find the right treatment that will help him. I had come to realize the schizophrenia medication is not easy to come by, and that one type of medication does not work for everybody. I'm sorry, it makes me very sad reading. My son is still in the dark tunnel in a mental health care prison. And I hope someday he will be able to see green fields and pretty mountains again, like we did in our travels in Germany and Switzerland. Thank you for listening.
Laura, thank you so much. Robin, do you want to say something?
No, I was going to say how brave, but to share that with us and how important for us to hear. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening. And I know right now everything is in my head. What D.A. Gonzalez said, you had to keep talking and had to keep sharing, because that is the only way a change can happen for people with mental illness. We don't understand what is going on in their brain, and the police cannot help. They don't understand themselves. I mean, I'm not blaming them. It's just, I did not know either until later on what was taking place.
Laura, thank you so much for your vulnerability and your courage and your grace. And thank you for sharing your story and your beautiful, beautiful boy with us. We will carry him always, right? And it feels like Robin said, that the greatest gift I think we can do sometimes is share the stories that are real, that are behind the work we do, and listen to the stories that are behind the work we do. Muchísimas, muchísimas gracias. Mucho cariño.
Thank you so much for listening. And your kindness and compassion is very important.
Here's what I would like to do. I want, that's an impossible story to go forward from. It's an impossible story to make a quick shift from. And what I would like to do is I would like to ask Michelle Truxillo, instead of singing at the very end, Michelle, would you sing your song now? And you're going to have to unmute yourself, Michelle.
Yes, I will if I can. I need just a minute to.
Yeah.
Thank you for, this is perhaps the only group that I could feel so comfortable sharing. I appreciate, because it's a very tragic story.
Yes.
And most of the time, it's not only me. There are so many parents that they had to go through the same thing.
Yeah. We love you, Laura.
May I say one thing, please, Miss Nieto? Thank you so much for the courage to bring your son's story, your family story to us. And I just wanted to tell you that we need to hear this in a human form and not just see it on social media or via a third party. Our hearts go out to you. Grace and peace to you. And I know that all of us that are here tonight are just loving on you, and we're sending you love, you and your family love. Grace and peace to you.
Thank you so much.
Michelle, possible?
Yeah, I'll try.
Thank you.
This is for you and for your son.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to sing. Yeah. How could anyone ever tell you you are anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you are less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Laura. And this is all a reminder always that our work is about fierce persistence on the one hand and about love on the other, and that those two have always got to be together. So may we all carry this as a reminder that this is what the engine is of all of our efforts and work, and every piece of voter registration and everything we do is about these things.
Please read the story completely because it is a long pages, 10 pages, but it's worth it, I think.
We will send it out. We will absolutely send it out so everybody will be able to read the whole thing. So I don't know how to make this transition any more gracefully. Anything be after Laura's story feels hard. And I want to say something about we're going to talk in the last remaining 15 minutes just about the few areas of work, because this is where we get to the point of, well, what can we do, right? What can we do about these things? And so give me a minute here. I want to pull this up because I do want to come back to what we can do, because without being able to remember what work is possible, it can become too disheartening. So I want to talk about what's the work that we are, and we are not going to be doing updates about the many kinds of troubler work that is underway. We're only going to be doing updates about the work that we are recruiting for today. So this is recruitment here, and I'm going to change the order of these just a little bit. Pat, would you talk about the work that you are recruiting for related to Deborah Gonzalez? Justice is on the agenda.
Yes, we all know that Necessary Trouble has worked with Deborah Gonzalez for a long time. We've supported her when she was running for the Georgia House of Representatives, and then also now that she's been elected district attorney for Athens Oconee district. And what she's doing is so amazing in terms of bringing progressive revolution to that job and to the work that's going to be done there. And so we want to support her in that work, and have been talking to her and her community outreach staffer about what we can do. One of the things that Deborah believes strongly is that there needs to be more connection to the community and work out in the community to find out how problems can be anticipated and stopped before they reach the level of going into the police or the district attorney. And one area right now that she's looking at is caused by the pandemic, because there are children who are not going to school because they don't have the resources in their families to do remote learning at home. And so you've got kids who are just one step away from doing something really stupid that's going to have them carrying a criminal or felonious charges through their whole lives. Young girls who can be caught up in sex trafficking. So not going to school and hanging out with your friends can easily lead you at that age to doing something very foolish. So what she has done is created a fund that will be used to use small amounts of money to help local groups, the chess club, to get chessboards so all the kids can play chess, a place where they need space because of pandemic. It's hard to find places to have these meetings, programs for the children, the young people, the teens. And so what we're doing is that this is the most grassroots kind of thing you can do. How do you provide help for those groups so they can help the children? And we'll be doing later this summer, we'll be doing an event for Deborah and some others to explain this work. And also it'll be a fundraising, but it doesn't have to be a lot of money. $100 can help one of these local groups buy the materials they need. A couple of $100 goes a long way in this kind of work. So we'll be planning this event to explain what's going on and how it's important, and to talk about some fundraising to help that. What we need, our ask, is we need some people, some troublers who are interested in this work to come along and to help us. So we have right now Robin Shahar, Amy Landsberg, David Lyle from Deborah's staff, and me. Jenny McGuire is helping too when school's out and she has more time. We need troublers who are interested in attacking criminal justice reform from this grassroots angle. If you're interested in working with us, please put your name and DA, just district attorney, your name and DA in the chat, and I'll get in touch with you. Thank you.
You know, I had to say something, Pat. I am a retired teacher, and I have been in magnet schools and in open campus with all the kids in trouble, and also I am a volunteer for the Department of Corrections. So I have helped. There is not only chess, but it can be include art, yoga, movies, puzzles. There's a lot of things that can be done to really, it's educational, you know, in their minds, they can be done, and games, and you know, there's a lot of things, and I can put it together. I mean, I have done for the Department of Corrections in different ways. So I would be glad to help, because I have worked for so many years with teenagers, you know, so I kind of know exactly their mentality, how they react and act, and how to calm them down and all that.
Wonderful. Thank you,
you.
Laura. Thank you, Laura. And if anybody else, this is a very practical way of addressing some of the issues in terms of criminal justice reform from the grassroots, supporting the most progressive DA in all of Georgia. So
Yeah.
if you are willing to help with this, Pat's team is in very much need of a few more good workers. And so if you would put your name in the chat and you would put DA or district attorney, we would be supremely grateful. We're going to keep going here. Pam Woodley, would you unmute yourself, and just if you would take just a minute or two and say a little bit about the voter registration with Poder Latinx. Okay, Pam, are you there? If you're talking, you are not unmuted yet. There you go.
Woo! Yes, Poder Latinx is it's a national organization that is working to get Latinx more involved, integrated in the political process in the United States. And we Necessary Trouble, are going to be working with the Georgia branch of that, helping them with voter registration. We don't have a lot of details yet. But again, if you would like to help with voter registration in the Latinx, and they also focus on the AAPI population, that would be great. If you put your name in the chat, you might be interested in that. There's going to be some trainings, and then we'd be going to various events and helping register to vote these young people and all people.
Thank you, Pam. And Pam and Martha Reese are co-leading that effort. They have a little team already, but it is a fantastic opportunity to be working to register young Latinx voters. Put your name in the chat with voter registration. And then Martha Laird, would you say something about the diversification steering group?
Sure. As we all remember, I'm sure that as of last summer now, which is a long time ago in our minds, we started an effort in Necessary Trouble to actually diversify ourselves as our group and then ourselves in our lives. And this little team, we are calling it the diversity support team group, whatever it is. Our role is to support and encourage troublers in this effort. So not to do it, but to support y'all in doing it. And we met for the first time about 2 weeks ago. And our first thing was trying to figure out a little bit what's the challenge that our group may need to meet first to help everybody. And what we realized was, we think what it is that we finally all live very segregated lives. And one of our jobs will be to help and support and encourage us as we diversify our lives, so that then we are connected to people who might actually, we could invite to join Necessary Trouble. So to do that, we have two little prongs of our effort. One is that we want to develop ways for longtime troublers and new troublers to actually get to know each other better, so that our connections are strong, and that new people feel connected to something when they actually join us, besides just the work of it all. And then the other prong is for us to research and then communicate to you ways that we can actually connect with more Black, Indigenous, people of color folks. So we're researching that right now, Googling it, all that kind of stuff. So we're looking for opportunities in arts and culture, political and social justice, and affinity groups and socializing, where we can actually connect with people not just like ourselves. So we will be sending that out in the updates through Becky soon. So be looking for that. If you'd like to join our little team, we would love to have you. That little team is Sandra Menace, Jessica Mathis, and Mary Davis, and myself. We don't need a huge amount of people, but we would always love folks who wanted to join us. So if you want to be a part of that, put diversity steering team, I guess, in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martha. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you to that team for supporting this effort. Karen McCowan, I'm going to share my screen, which has your PowerPoint slides. And would you talk about redistricting reform?
Sure, absolutely. Most of you know something about Fair Districts Georgia. We're a nonpartisan organization that works to end gerrymandering in the state of Georgia. If we have learned anything from what has happened recently with SB 202 and other voter suppression bills, is that this is going to happen fast. The redistricting will be done this fall. It's late this year because the census is not going to be released until September 30th, but we have no doubt that planning is already underway to introduce something when the time comes and the special session is called. So if you could go to my next slide, please, Becky. So we need to get ready too, and we are already starting to do that. We have a wide variety of activities. We need a wide variety of skill sets. So if you are interested in working with us, we need you. And many troublers have already joined us, but please put your name in the chat and let me know.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. And our hope is that we can probably at the next meeting, I hope, do a deeper dive into redistricting. Let me also just say something about our next meeting date, which is going to be, there's a slight possibility if this changes that this might change. But if you would hold this date and just keep an eye on the updates for confirmation of it, that would be absolutely wonderful. So Sunday, May 23rd at 4 p.m., Sunday, May 23rd at 4 p.m., and I'll be sending that out in the updates repeatedly. I am so moved by this group. I am so moved by the bravery in here, by the commitment in here, by every aspect of it, by the love that's present and by the fierceness that's present. And what I would like to do is I would like Michelle to do one more round of that song. Can we end with that? Would that be okay, Michelle? And you'll have to unmute. There you go.
Yes, where I can actually sing it, I think. How could anyone ever tell you you are anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you are less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. Thank you.
Could we just unmute ourselves and just appreciate Michelle and Lauda and Judy and Zan and Robin and Karen and Pat and everybody who has participated tonight in this extraordinary fabric that we are weaving. So much gratitude to every one of you. Thank you, and here we go forward.